Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Lothar Krinke.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Lothar Krinke, and he is CEO at Newronika, which is a deep brain stimulator, adaptive deep brain stimulator company that has good closed loop technology that kind of adapts based on the signals that it's putting out. So Lothar, pleasure to have you on the show. And do you want to introduce yourself better than I just did?
Thank you. Well, it was pretty good. And by the way, congratulations for pronouncing my name correctly in German. So as you can tell, I was born in Germany, but I've lived for more than 40 years in the United States. Most relevant really to this conversation is really that I spent many years of my life at Medtronic running neuroscience and business development for the neuromodulation group, and eventually was the global general manager for Medtronic's DBS, or as we call the brain modulation business. And I left Medtronic in 2000 to become the CEO of a non-invasive brain stimulation company called MaxStim, because I was convinced that DBS was maybe too expensive and too invasive, and let's go to the non-invasive side of the house. I did this for 5 years, and then I saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and I said, you know what, I have to go back to DBS. Non-invasive isn't as great as everyone seems to think, and joined Newronika, who has developed the world's most advanced DBS system. Yes, that's me.
So light at the end of the tunnel, does that mean funding ran out of the other one, or what forced it?
No, the company really does well. I did 5 years, and I set sort of the goal to be at the company for 5 years. And we grew the company from somewhere around 9 million to about $50 million of revenue through a bunch of acquisitions and innovation. But then the path forward for MaxStim, or what we then called it, was in a different direction. I left to join Newronika because I was so excited. MaxStim and Welcome are doing really well, so that's not the issue. But it was really the opportunity to do something that I have a lot of passion for, which is closed loop deep brain stimulation.
So why is deep brain stimulation so exciting for you?
Well, you know, I can start with something very emotional, maybe. What can be more intimate than studying each other's brain? And that is exciting to me. With a closed-loop DBS system, you essentially can collect brain signals 24/7 and really learn and make discoveries about the human brain. So that's a big picture topic. And more specifically, though, to Newronika is really focused on the next generation algorithms and filtering technology to close the loop for deep brain stimulation in Parkinson's disease. And the company had accomplished something amazing with very little funding, was able to get a CE mark for a sensing-enabled deep brain stimulation system. And we're collecting very interesting data in Parkinson's patients. It's really about the opportunity to build a great company.
So maybe we can explain what deep brain stimulation is, what it's treated for, what are maybe some of the fringe things or things that are being explored right now on the edges, and then why does it work?
Why does it work? That's a really good question that I'm not so sure we can answer with certainty. I think we're learning a lot, and we have really good hypotheses. In silico models can predict all kinds of things from DBS, but DBS really is a pacemaker for the brain. But instead of the wires going to the heart, they go to the human brain. And of course, the human brain signals are about 1 billion times more complicated than cardiac signals. But it is fundamentally the idea of changing outcomes in diseases like Parkinson's. It is it's approaching $1 billion of revenue. Most of that is in Parkinson's disease. And Medtronic is the market leader, and Boston Scientific, as well as Abbott, are strong players in deep brain stimulation as well. Interestingly, DBS has been around for many years. It was actually in the 80s that it was discovered through serendipity that deep brain stimulation of, at that time, the thalamus could eliminate tremors in patients with Parkinson's and related disorders. Eventually was figured out that a better target is the subthalamic nucleus, but the therapy has been around really since the 80s. Okay, you also asked new indications, so I can tell you what the indications are that are FDA approved today. Parkinson's, essential tremor, dystonia, OCD, and epilepsy are the 5 indications that are approved. But more than 70% of all implants today are still in Parkinson's, where really the clinical benefit is the best.
Okay. Sounds good. And you were saying this technology has been known for a long time. And you also said that you were in the US for 40 years. Did that kind of coincide, or how did you get into the field?
No, that is an accident. No, I came into the US for something completely different. I came to the US on an exchange program, and I was really a molecular biologist, but I also did my qualifiers for my PhD in neuroscience. And I did a couple of things, including being a management consultant with McKinsey after the wall came down. So I went back from the US to Germany in 1991 to be part of the unification, and then did a bunch of things, including Celera, the company that sequenced the human genome. Eventually ended up at Medtronic to figure out whether Medtronic should get into bioscience. So I was the director of bioscience development and eventually became the leader of DBS. So my tenure has nothing to do with this. I really discovered DBS as a Medtronic employee who was really interested in neuroscience.
Okay. Yeah, very cool. And hey guys, just a quick pause to talk about our show sponsor, Iris Biomedical. Iris Biomedical provides a portfolio of neural sensing and simulation platforms and components to accelerate early-stage medical device companies through preclinical and early feasibility studies. Iris is an ideal partner for companies with limited budgets or resources to invest in developing a new platform from the ground up. Their experienced engineering team, in-house cleanroom facilities, and ISO 13485 certified quality management system allow for prototyping and early-stage commercial production. Be sure to tell them you heard about it on the Neural Implant Podcast. That'll really help us out. Thanks. Now, back to the show. You were saying before you were worried about it being too invasive and that the surgeries weren't too intense, and maybe you were talking about expense too. Is it something that you think can be fixed, or do you think it's the benefits outweigh the cost, or what kind of changed your mind about this?
Yeah, there are several discussion groups of people that talk about DBS, and one of the things that people don't often talk about, what we should talk about, is the big problem with deep brain stimulation is that it's really expensive, right? For a patient in the US, the initial workup and surgeries approaching $100,000, right? And then every couple of years, the patients need a replacement IPG. So we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars of lifetime cost of deep brain stimulation. So if we want to treat disorders like depression, where there are millions and millions of patients, we can work in a model where a deep brain stimulation system costs maybe $30,000 plus all the surgery costs and everything else. It would bankrupt the system. So the one thing we do need to address is really the cost. And the cost driver really of deep brain stimulation isn't the manufacturing of the system. Now, that's not cheap either. It's certainly not $100,000. It's certainly less than $10,000 to make one of those things. It's really about the entire, how expensive is it to really develop such a system? How expensive is brain surgery, particularly functional brain surgery? How expensive is it to have all the pre-operation preparation? So I think the field needs to think about how we can lower the cost of deep brain stimulation to make it available to not hundreds of thousands of patients, but literally millions of patients. That's costly. Of course, it is invasive too, right? At the end of the day, it is convenient to the patient because an implant is actually quite convenient, right? You don't have to worry about you losing it or forgetting it. It's implanted, and you don't have to worry about compliance. The system works. However, patients these days, they accept the cardiac pacemaker, right? 95% of patients that need a pacemaker get one, right? But less than 15% of patients with Parkinson's get deep brain stimulation. One underlying factor is that patients really are concerned about virus in their brain because they wonder, what does it do to my personality, to who I am?
So you think that the cost is the most important thing, that the thing that's stopping it the most, rather than the implantation or, I don't know, lack of technology? Or if you had to order them, of the three that you mentioned, what do you think is the worst, the biggest impediment?
I think it really depends on the country that you're talking about. So it's a combination of country and indication. So in the United States for Parkinson's, it really isn't the reimbursement that's an issue. The technology is reimbursed. Yeah, there are co-pays for patients, but it is reimbursed. So in the US, in Parkinson's, it's really the bottleneck is twofold. Number one is audio specialists and neurologists that are sufficiently comfortable with the technology to refer their patients to have an implant, and patients' concerns with what I said earlier, the wires in their brain. Now, if we talk about other countries, even in Europe, cost matters. Many countries in Europe have a fixed budget where a center is told you can do 20 implants a year, and you prioritize how you allocate your 20 implants to the 10,000 patients that might be eligible in your area. So it really depends on that. And then, of course, there's other indications where maybe the clinical evidence is still a bit of an issue. If we talk about epilepsy, maybe the therapy isn't quite good enough yet to grow as fast as it should grow. So in epilepsy, the clinical evidence suggests that about 50% of the patients have about a 50% reduction in seizures, which isn't great, because if you're one of the 50% that don't have that, and also a 50% reduction in seizure frequency might not be so meaningful for a patient. What the patient cares about is seizure freedom, or maybe 1 or 2 a year, but not instead of 10 in a certain time period, now I have 5. I still have 5, so that doesn't change my life fundamentally.
Yeah. What do you think is the thing that's holding it back?
Oh, in epilepsy, I'm not sufficiently of an expert. The real holy grail here is twofold: that you truly can predict when a seizure occurs, so that you can interpret the brain signal so you know the seizure is about to happen, and then to have the appropriate stimulation parameters to abort this seizure from occurring. That's what NeuroPace is doing, but it's not perfect yet.
Okay. Yeah, and you guys have Newronika is known for the alpha deep brain stimulation system, which is an adaptive deep brain stimulation. So what is this? Why is the one at Newronika better than the alternatives?
Yeah, let me talk fundamentally of the basics and then maybe about the differentiation for Newronika. Okay, so there is a biomarker that we have in Parkinson that has been known for a while. It's not patented. It's available to everyone. It is the power. You look at the local field potentials. Those are the brain signals that you can sense right through the leads that are implanted in the patients. And you look at a specific frequency range. In this particular case, it's the beta range. And you look for the power in that range. So how much activity do you have in that range? And patients with Parkinson's symptoms have very strong activity in this beta range. And it has been known for years that this beta power correlates with symptoms of Parkinson's. Okay, so Medtronic does this, we do this. But the only really players, right, that there may be a few more, but the ones that I can talk about are Medtronic, where I used to be, and we both are working with this beta power. The differentiator between Medtronic and Newronika is that we have taken a different approach to signal processing, which is we implemented a set of filters which Medtronic did not implement, and then our algorithm is different. Medtronic uses a threshold algorithm. We use a proportional control algorithm. We believe ours is better than Medtronic's, but we don't know. We'll see. The real important topic here is that we're not trying to necessarily beat Medtronic. I've been there, and I know how powerful that place is and how good the technology really is. It is about really pushing the field forward. There should be room for more than one adaptive DBS player. Abbott and Boston, as far as we can tell, not playing in that field. I don't think they're convinced yet that closed-loop deep brain stimulation is the future. Medtronic and we believe that it is really the future for deep brain stimulation.
Why do you believe that? What convinces you that adaptive DBS is better?
Number one, we do have clinical data that shows that patients with adaptive DBS have more good quality time per day. Now, our data is only a few patients at this point. We have more than 30 patients where we had short-term implants, but we only have data on 3 patients so far with long-term implants. But across those 4 patients, on average, there was a 4-hour improvement of on time, which is good efficacy without dyskinesia, these side effects. So we saw a 4% increase in this perfect time for a patient. That convinces me that it improves outcomes in patients. We also know that all of our patients so far preferred the adaptive mode over the conventional mode. That makes a lot of sense. And then finally, if you think about how to manage, patients today have to go to the neurologist frequently because the neurologist really manually needs to adjust the IPG. Now, Abbott has remote programming, so the patient doesn't actually have to be in the same room, but still the neurologist needs to program the patient by essentially changing the dials, which contact, which frequency, which amplitude, which pulse width. And that needs to change because the patient might just say, oh, I didn't like the last settings. I rather have a little bit more dyskinesia, but less off time. And we automate all this. The system automatically adjusts to the patient needs minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. So the patient gets precisely the right amount of DBS that they need. Truly personalized therapy.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think it makes much more sense, and I don't really understand why you wouldn't do something like this that continually adjusts and improves. And yeah, that's really interesting. What are some of the biggest challenges right now at Newronika?
Well, I think it's not just true for us, it's probably true for all small pre-revenue companies. Fundraising is really hard right now, given the economic situation. I can say we should have raised more cash a year or maybe a year and a half ago. It is hard right now. So we are raising additional funds to enable us to do our pivotal trial, to improve our technologies. We're making good progress on our round, but it's not fully subscribed yet. So I think cash matters. We need that. Other challenges are just like any company. If you're a small company, you have to improve your technology. You need to get an IDE. You need to get CE mark. There's just a lot of work that you have to work off, but there's nothing that fundamentally holds us back.
Okay. So in 5 years, knock on wood, you get all the funding you want. What do you kind of see the future of Newronika?
I am convinced that we could go and commercialize this technology ourselves. Okay, I know how to do this. I did this at Medtronic. I think we have really good technology. I'm confident we're going to get DR compliant CE mark and eventually FDA approval so the company can be successful. But the reality is, more likely than not, someone will acquire us. And lots of people say, so Medtronic, Boston, Abbott, who's going to acquire you? And I'm not so sure that is necessarily the answer. Of course, our story is Medtronic is creating the need because they are also in adaptive deep brain stimulation. Then Abbott and Boston have to do something. So that's our pitch to Abbott and Boston Scientific. But I think the more likely exit partners are companies that are today in the neurosurgery space. So they make drills or navigation systems or make operating rooms and so on. So I think the more likely exit partner would be someone like a Zimmer or a Stryker or an Integra or even an Insight Tech, because they already have an infrastructure in our space and we would give them a product to sell.
Interesting. Yeah, that's something I haven't heard before. I don't know. Do you have any reasoning for this, or is this just something that you heard from conversations? Or yeah, why do you think the Medtronics and Abbotts and everything like this, that they wouldn't be interested?
Well, Medtronic has their own program, so I don't necessarily think so. Of course, we're trying to sell ourselves to Boston and Abbott, and obviously we talk to everyone. To be honest, although it's still a long time until we get FDA approval, and we're talking 2026, 2027, we're talking to these players and discuss that with them. So it's founded on really discussions with all these leaders. The one thing, can I add one more thing? Because you asked what 5 years or maybe longer, I think there will be new indications for deep brain stimulation and adaptive deep brain stimulation. So one of the things we're doing is collaborate more and more with researchers in the field, so we can complement our internal innovation with external innovation. So these researchers in the field, like down in Gainesville or whatever, they will actually make the discoveries that then will allow us to build systems that meet those needs. So I think there will be new indications for deep brain stimulation. Personally, I think our system is well suited for epilepsy. We know that there's a very strong interest in deep brain stimulation for psychiatric disorders. Maybe we'll play there. So I think the future is bright for DBS, particularly for new indications.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And then before we started recording, you said that you were in Minneapolis. I was also seeing something about a West Virginia University adjunct assistant professor, and then Newronika is in Milan. So what kind of crazy travel are you doing? How is this all possible?
Yeah, that's a good point. I do travel a lot. Next week, I will actually be in West Virginia, where I have an adjunct professorship there at the Rockefeller Institute. It's one of the key centers for deep brain stimulation, or really neuromodulation research. Ali Rizai and Pete Conrad and others are there. They offered me that adjunct professorship so I can stay close to the science. Yeah, so next week I'm there, and the week after I'm in Milano for a board meeting and not returning until December 24th. And so my family isn't too happy that I'm just arriving just before Christmas back home. But yeah, I do travel a lot. That's what it takes these days in a small company that is going after a global market.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Yeah, and why aren't you in Gainesville? Again, we were talking about your trip to Gainesville, but Gainesville also, I was surprised how big the DBS field is here. So yeah, why didn't you come here?
Well, just tell the guys there if they want to give me an adjunct professorship, I'll take it. No, all kidding aside. So the West Virginia adjunct professorship had also a lot to do with my prior job. I was part of developing the TMS program and so on. But back to Gainesville, clearly is one of the most important deep brain stimulation research centers in the world. Gainesville, the team in Gainesville hosts the DBS think tank, which is the best really technology, new indication, think group there is. Yeah, looks always towards Gainesville for guidance.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I've attended some of those, and when it was on Zoom and everything like this, and it was very interesting. Yeah, so for people starting out in the field, do you have any advice? Should they move to a different country for 40 years and then be able to get to your position, or what would you recommend?
Well, you're surprising me a little bit with that question. I need to think a little bit about it. So if you are early in your career and you're more technical oriented, I'm not talking about MBA, okay? I'm talking about technical people. Like in all fields, AI is important, but I don't think AI or even machine learning has been sufficiently applied in our space. People do it and they talk about it, but if you look at other fields, even EEG, that the use of AI or machine learning, these modern technologies are much more penetrated. And it's amazing to me that even in a field like EEG, right, an EEG is still read by a neurologist or an epileptologist, right? A computer can probably interpret those signals on the EEG better than a poor epileptologist have to look through all those traces, right? So I think data science, AI, automation, those kind of disciplines going to become more and more important. That's where I think the innovation will be unlocked eventually. So that's one space. That's if you're a technology person. Of course, the field, really, the broader field, lacks clinicians, right? I don't know what the statistics are, but I remember everyone is very concerned about the number of neurologists going into retirement. Do we have enough people to take care of all the patients that I need? And particularly in DBS, we do need people that are willing and excited really about understanding the technology behind deep brain stimulation. So in the clinical field, is go into neurology, go into sort of a quasi-interventional neurology field, but not for removing blood clots in the brain, but really for getting interested in neuromodulation.
Yeah, I wonder if both of those could be combined, almost like the clinicians, almost the diagnosing and everything like this with this machine learning AI. And maybe you could predict a phone, maybe there's more shaking or something on the phone, or something about the movement or something like this could maybe tip people off and be like, hey, you should go see a neurologist or something like this. But yeah, that's really interesting.
I mean, look, there is a Parkinson's app on the Apple Watch. So you're absolutely right with wearables. The future is wearables. What we're doing actually, and we're a small company, we can't do everything, but we've built an infrastructure where we can integrate data sets. One of our founders so happens to be a data scientist, right? People tend to think only about the movement, so the sensors, the accelerometers or gyrometers in a wearable device. Think of EEG, think of patients entering symptoms, think of other physiological markers we should be integrating. I think that's where the future is, putting all that data together with real good clinical data so we can build a good discovery platform to get better algorithms and maybe discover different ways of intervening when things don't go quite right in the brain network.
Yeah. No, that's definitely the future. Yeah. What's a big mistake or wrong direction that you see researchers or people in your field going down? When you see it, you're just like, you should stop.
I don't really want to criticize this.
You don't want to lose any friends.
No, what I'm saying is a lot of discovery is done through serendipity. And serendipity is a different word of saying I made a mistake and discovered something through that mistake. Occasionally that happens that way. That's how DBS for Tremor was really discovered, through an observation in the operating room. So I don't think that's a mistake. What I do see sometimes is naivete from how difficult it is to move from an original idea or an observation to clinical trials, clinical validation, and then a product. Okay, so that path from discovery to actually having a product on the market is a long path, and lots of things can go wrong, and lots of things are really boring, right? Biocompatibility is something that is expensive and takes a long time and isn't all that exciting, but you have to do it to get a product to the market, right? So I think people often underestimate what it takes to get from an idea to a product. On the other hand, it's the inverse. Sometimes people just don't have the guts to go for, so they say, interesting biomarker, but let's just find a better biomarker. Let's do something else. So you never get started. So people criticize beta oscillation sometimes, saying, hey, there are better biomarkers you should think about, gamma, other, but you have to start. Sometimes you just have to start and get going. Otherwise, you can always find reasons why not to move forward. That I think that mistake I personally have seen in friends that are researchers. They could find many reasons why this experiment or this clinical trial could go wrong, so they never do it. So I would encourage people, just go for it. Even if it fails, you might get lucky and have some serendipity.
That's interesting. So I would love an explanation of the differences, beta, gamma waves, and what they usually represent. But also, it sounds like this should be something that you could just throw in an algorithm and get an answer almost immediately. So it shouldn't be something that you'd be sitting on for a year. Yeah. So could you explain the beta and gamma waves?
Oh, those are just different frequency ranges. So beta is around 13 hertz, 12, 13 hertz. And there's many definitions. Alpha is more like 10 and below. So there are these ranges that people that looked at EEGs, really, they came up with these names for these ranges. So beta, gamma, and alpha, they tend to be in an equilibrium to put the brain into a state where it's either pro-movement, you want to move, that's where gamma gets activated, or you want to inhibit movement, and you have beta. There's a guy who explained it really nicely once to me. It's like, if you're on a bus, right? You're standing on the bus, you don't want to move a whole lot because you might fall. So your brain gets beta to just focus on that. If you're on the bus, if you stand on the bus, that you don't fall over. But there might be another context where you're not on the bus, but you want to get ready for a run. Now you need the gamma. So this equilibrium really is a brain state that either says, don't move or get ready to move.
Okay. And so why would it take so long to investigate it?
Oh, why would it take so long to investigate? Well, before long-term brain implants, such as what NeuroPace has or what Medtronic had with their original sensing device, no one was able to really collect data from deep in the brain 24/7. So you need to get all this data, okay? So the original data for beta was really obtained by using intraoperative recording. So people got DBS surgery or epilepsy surgery, and while they were in the operating room, there were a couple of experiments were done where you had these wires in the brain and you could have the patient either on medication or off medication. But that was actually, you didn't get a lot of data. and it was from an artificial environment in the operating room or doing a battery exchange. Maybe if you were lucky, because patients had externalized leads from their depth or grid electrodes for epilepsy monitoring. So that changed when Medtronic came out with the Activa PC plus S, or those of us who were part of the team, we called it the brain radio. Then this information became available, but you can only get the information from where the lead is actually located. So in the terms of, there are other areas in the brain that have different frequency ranges you might be interested in, but if you don't have the wires at that spot, you can't record it. So it's not as simple as saying, hey, let's just record it all the time, because you have to know where you're recording. You really need to then also correlate this to the symptoms of the patient. But that's where now things will move really fast, because there is the integration of wearable devices with these sensing devices. So I think over the next 2 to 5 years, we as the field will discover a lot.
Wow, that's pretty crazy. It really reminds me of like looking into a room through a keyhole, and you get a few minutes here and there of a patient. And it's funny to think that a lot of these assumptions and debates and everything, technologies are based off a few minutes of data that you get here and there over the lifetime of the patient. That's pretty crazy how that's extrapolated.
And personally, that's what was one of the reasons why I went into the TMS field. And then we acquired EGI, which was an EEG company, because at least with EEG, you can record non-invasively, possibly for a longer time, although that's an issue too, right? How long can you really wear an EEG net, and then integrate it in that case with transcranial magnetic stimulation data. But the problem with EEG is it's very noisy data. And you only really get data from the cortex. It's really hard to get data from very deep in the brain. So there's always trade-offs depending on the technology. The only technology that gives you really super good resolution on the spatial and time domain would be magnetoencephalography. I can't speak English. MEG technology, yeah.
And that's what you were working on before this, right? Like you were
on EEG, yeah.
Oh, on EEG. I thought the MAG,
no. MEG is another technology. It's called magnetoencephalography. Magnetoencephalography is a technology where you can actually measure brain activity, both on very good time resolution as well as spatial resolution.
And that's different than MagStim and transcranial magnetic stimulation.
Yeah. Both have to do with magnetism. One is to sense and the one is to deliver electricity. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, cool. Lothar, I think this has been really good. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention?
I think we covered it all. Maybe just to get back to what we said earlier. In my mind, it is almost unconscionable that only 15% of patients that could benefit from DBS in Parkinson's get the therapy today. So somehow we need to have a battle cry. We need to have the responsibility to make this therapy available to more people. And the way to do that is less invasive, more automation, and lower cost.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Definitely agree. I think let's help more people get this in more people's brains, and through that the technology will improve. And this will be a thing of the past, almost like dying from diabetes 100 years ago. Now it's just something you deal with, and you can have more or less.
Just a good example. People in type 1 diabetes, people use pumps that are linked directly to a glucose sensor. So in that space, the loop has been closed, just like in a cardiac pacemaker or an ICD. So people always think we're talking about the future. Actually, I think we're actually behind. In diabetes and in cardiac, they already figured out how to close the loop. We just have to do this in neurology.
Which is funny because there's so much more data that you could use, and it's the brain. Like you should be having your smartest people working on it. But maybe it's because it is more complicated.
And there's more people. So I really talked about this space of deep brain stimulation, which is a bidirectional device that senses and delivers therapy with few contacts. Of course, there's other technologies out there in the BCI space where people use a lot more contacts and a lot more sophisticated sensing technology to decode brain activity. So we're not the only game in town when it comes to those kinds of tools. There's lots of companies, lots of exciting companies in that space.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool, Lothar. This has been great.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.